Hey everyone, coming to watch this later because somehow I'm doubting. I'll be shocked if we get more than one person coming in because one thing I often hear about these streams is from a lot of people. Okay, we'll just name her. It's usually Kate saying surprised when she's able to say I've seen this movie. And this one definitely is, even though it's a recent movie, but still, I feel like this is one fewer people will have watched. We're talking, of course, about the Banshees of Inisherin, which came out last year and was on both of our top five lists.
Yes.
We're both very fond of this movie. First of all, before we get into that, how are you doing, Jared? It's been a couple weeks.
I'm doing all right. Yeah, we took a little bit of a break, some of it planned, some of it not planned, which is the way these things tend to go. But we did have kind of in the intermission there. We did get to talk about Sleepy Hollow with Trish, but I used the time to mostly I went and did a wilderness medicine course up in Sausalito, California, which was awesome. And then I've just been watching a lot of football. So but
Nice.
I'm excited to be back. I feel like you're saying that, not a lot of people are going to be watching this. Maybe this is a little bit more of the one for us variety,
Yeah,
one for them, one for us.
which I'm kind of how about all for you and none for me. Sorry, I couldn't help quoting La La Land.
Yes.
Um, which I do have to say, we have our one so far. Welcome, Danny. I'm
Hey,
glad you
Dan.
joined us, and he loves the Specken movie. So yeah, it's a really great one, but it's interesting that you say that this one is kind of for us because this feels like a very personal movie for me, just because we talked a little bit off air where I said I looked at when this came out and it was right about the time when my mom passed away. I'm not sure if I saw it right then because I don't think I was in the movie going mood at the time. But this movie is very much a tragedy and talking about loss and um, you know some of that, family members, dear friends, and maybe not all loss in terms of death, but certainly in terms of like sudden abrupt change in your life. And so I'd like to I'd like to know what was going through my head when I saw this because it's not a happy-go-lucky movie. We were talking about the fact that this is uh, this is a companion piece of sorts to the film In Bruges. It reunites director Martin McDonagh with his stars Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson, but it's a very different look at the relationship that those two actors have with each other in with their characters in this movie. But I'm interested. Was was that the lens through which you approached this movie, having seen In Bruges before? I'm curious. Like, uh, had you seen that film before?
I had. So this movie, I think we should mention, is written and directed by a gentleman named Martin McDonagh, who has done a number of films. He is, I believe, credited with 4 movies so far, in addition to an Oscar-winning short he did called Six Shooter. And In Bruges was his first, and that movie it's a very specifically strange kind of movie, brilliant in its approach, but it is, I like to refer to it as an absurdist comedy with like pitch black, elements in there. It's one of the things that McDonagh does so well is he takes elements of things that should not be considered funny, and he makes them funny while also not allowing you to uh, lose sight of the fact that this is tragedy. That's inherent in Bruges. His second film, I don't know if you've seen Seven Psychopaths. That one I remember tilting a bit more towards the absurdist. Though
that's the one that I haven't seen.
Yeah, I've seen it. Of his four, I think that's probably my least favorite. It's still very good. It's just it's a little bit more on the farcical side. And then the film that what immediately preceded this was a movie called Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which is where he kind of really rose to prominence because that movie got a lot of attention for the Academy Awards. And in a lot of acclaim, but also a lot of controversy because there were some elements in that movie, specifically racial elements, that people thought perhaps were not handled quite as well as they could have been, especially from what we could call an outsider's perspective, because Martin McDonagh is Irish, and he was telling what was at its heart a very American story about the intersection of race and violence and loss and murder. You know, the loss of a woman's daughter, and the kind of almost, I wouldn't call it redemptive, but in an element redemptive journey of a racist cop character, which understandably set some people the wrong way. I like that movie, but I also feel that it is a movie where the thematic elements are perhaps a little bit better suited than the execution. And what's interesting about this, but it really gave me a respect for Martin McDonagh that made me realize I wanted to see whatever he would do next. And what he ended up choosing to do was kind of go back to his roots, starting work again with Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson, who, like him, are both Irish. Like him, starred in his first theatrical movie in Bruges. And this is, if Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri was a very American story, this is, at its heart, it's a very Irish story, which is interesting for us because neither one of us are Irish, and we're kind of coming at it from that outsider's perspective. But this is what Martin McDonagh knows best. And he just uses that opportunity to tell a very small, clearly very personal story that I just think the tone on this one is pitch perfect. It may not be to everyone's taste, but this is exactly the kind of story where you can just feel that from the writing to the performances to the direction to the music choices, everything about this movie is pitched to a very specific tenor, and it works exactly as it's supposed to. And for me, that means it sings. It may not sing for everyone, but I found it, brilliant, and it's one of the reasons why it was one of my favorite movies of last year.
I think a lot of people may come to this one under the misapprehension that it's going to be really funny. Not really helped by the fact that it was nominated at the Golden Globes for Best Musical or Comedy, which, like so many things with the Golden Globes and their category choices, may have been a miscalculation. In my opinion, definitely should have been in the drama category because, this movie has funny parts, darkly funny parts, but I think overwhelmingly we talked about this, I would put this in the tragedy category. So I had seen some reactions where people were like, this was supposed to be a comedy. It was not, it was depressing. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's such a beautiful film, and very affecting. And I'm still not sure where I because In Bruges made such an impact on me, so I'm not sure what my ranking would be. But you and I often talk about the fact that ranking is kind of bull anyway. So I'm happy just letting these two films sit comfortably next to each other.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not big on rankings, but I do believe in being honest about the emotional response that a movie gives you. And I will say that I had the most profound emotional reaction to this movie of any of the movies that Martin McDonagh has done so far. So in that respect, I would say that it is my favorite of his work, even over In Bruges, which I do love dearly.
Yeah, it's a different kind of response. This definitely hit me on a sort of gut emotional level that makes you ponder a lot of things, about your own life. I think, and In Bruges is such a, so you go back to In Bruges for the entertainment value because it's so absurd, but also emotionally true, and so yeah, I think they're just different, but this film definitely hit me, and even today I went back to watch it again today, and I was really struck by it. And you said something where you know where you think in your memory that this is maybe a bit more of a comedy
Yes.
than it is, and then you go back to it and you're like, oh god, it's this is really hitting me, and so yeah, it's but we're gonna get into all that. I just real quick wanted to say hi, Laura. Thank you for
Hey, Laura.
popping
Thanks
in.
for popping in.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely don't spoil yourself on this movie because it takes.
Although, yeah. Yeah, I will say this movie, it has some elements that it's definitely better not to know beforehand, but it's also the kind of movie where I feel like it's harder to spoil it because you can tell someone the things that will happen in the movie and they will just be like, what? That makes no sense out of context. But then when you when you actually watch it in the context of the movie, that's where you get it as it was intended with the emotion. So I would definitely say go in spoiler free, but also this is the kind of movie. This is not one of those movies where if you know the quote unquote twist, not that there's a twist, but the surprising element that I think the movie is ruined, because that kind of implies that that's all there is. And for this movie, I really think it is about the journey, and the plot elements kind of serve the thematic story rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I think the only spoiler that there is really, and I've already given it away just by saying that the movie is a tragedy, because otherwise maybe you'll think that there's a happy ending, which there there's not. but it's like, yeah, it's weird. It's like I was just about to say, it's without, I mean, we're into the discussion, like our two lead characters don't die. We can't say that there's no deaths in the movie because there are. So, but it's just, I think part of the immense tragedy is the way we leave those two characters on the beach at the end of the movie. But I do want to hold on to that until we get further in the discussion. But I do think that kind of starting, as a way to, talk about the opening of the film, I will say that what's so heartbreaking to me about this movie is watching Colin Farrell's character just go from, this movie opens and he's just on top of the world. He's smiling. There's a rainbow in the background. Like this is a guy who, there's not much going on the, island of Inisherin, but, this is a guy who knows his place and like he's accepted his place in the world. And it's that he's a nice guy. He has his best friend. He has a sister and he has his donkey. and and he's perfectly happy and content with that. And what we see over the course of the movie is just that whoever you want to lay the blame at, or if there's nobody to blame, but just over the course of the movie we see this man sort of destroyed, and and definitely changed. And I think I said I was going to save talking about the end of the movie until a little bit further on, but I have to say, like, the most heartbreaking line is just, especially since, back to what Danny popped in, is using the word feckin', the fact that we hear that all throughout the movie, and then at the end of the movie, he's just like, I don't really fucking care. It's just so heartbreaking when we get to that point. And yeah, like, I can't single anybody out because the ensemble of this movie is incredible, but I have been such a fan of Colin Farrell since In Bruges, and he just has upped his game on a regular basis throughout the years, and he broke my heart with this movie. And we'll talk later about the fact that it's a crime that this movie didn't win any Academy Awards, even though I try not to let that bother me, but still.
Yeah, it was kind of, it came up against what ended up being an awards titan in Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I also think is a great movie, but it was also like, you wanted to hope that there was some hope that they could share the wealth, as it were. Especially in, I was really, really rooting for Colin Farrell, especially because that was one of the categories where this movie was not up against Everything Everywhere All at Once. Colin Farrell ended up losing to Brendan Fraser for The Whale, which is a movie I haven't seen, to be fair. But this performance by Colin Farrell is just magnificent. It was his first nomination, deservedly so, although one could argue he could have had many in the past. But it really is kind of a culmination for his character for his career, because I'm not breaking any new ground here. When Colin Farrell first burst onto the scene, he's an extraordinarily handsome guy, and he got cast in a lot of movies that required him to kind of be the stoic leading man, which was really not what he was best suited to. And once those movies didn't quite have as much financial success, he was kind of allowed to take on some parts that were a bit more character roles, either as the leads in smaller movies like In Bruges, or as the supporting player in a kind of a more out there movie, or in some cases, as from his other great performance from 2022, The Batman, as the Penguin, like completely unrecognizable under makeup. But in this movie, he is the lead of our story. One could argue that they're co-leads with Brendan Gleeson, but I really think it ultimately is Padraig Suliban's story. And the journey that you go on with Colin Farrell's character is the thing that will break your heart. And it is a magnificent performance. He rarely he rarely gets to shout and scream. He does have a couple good speeches, but he just is a raw nerve throughout this movie. Someone who has been wounded, someone who can't understand why this has happened to him, and the journey that it takes him on. I won't say it destroys him, but it changes him. And by the end of it, you have reached a point where you see what this very good, nice man, as you said at the beginning, has undergone something that has left him in a different place, and one could argue possibly a worse place, although he might dispute that, which is one of the interesting parts. We'll get to his final conversation with Brendan Gleeson's character on the beach. But what's perhaps the most tragic thing about the journey that Padraig goes on is that at the end of it, he doesn't seem ready to let go of who he's become. This is a movie ultimately about loss. If I had to define it in one word, there's death, there's, a search for answers, reckoning with the inexplicable, but at its core, it is a movie about what it is like to lose something and to not understand why. And at the end, we might have a better understanding, but I honestly don't know if that question is answered. And this, one of the tragedies is by the end, it seems like Podrick himself has resigned himself to the answer being unreachable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I chose that word destroyed because it's not so much that Podrick himself, and he certainly is resolved to continue on in the direction that he finds himself in. Oh, I just lost my camera shot. Hold on. There we go. More that the person that he was is destroyed. That, that innocence that he had about him is at the very least forever altered, and it's just sad because we see through so much of this movie that's kind of he's that's what he prioritizes, is, as he puts it earlier, niceness and being a good person. And I guess it's by only he can answer at the end of the movie how he feels about what kind of person he is going forward. But it's just very sad to see that loss of innocence. But so we're getting ahead of ourselves, because we should go ahead and kind of explain a bit about what gets him to that point. This movie starts off where he is his best friend, or who has been his best friend, is Colin, played by Brendan Gleeson. And there's such a tragic touch in the beginning of this movie where he goes over to Colin's house to see if he's going to join him up at the pub like they always do. And Colin just won't respond to him. He's just sitting there smoking a cigarette in his house. And so hold on a second. I'm just looking something up. And so Podrick goes back home to his sister, and there's a funny back and forth at that moment where she's like, have you been rowing with them? And it's like, we haven't been rowing. Are we rowing? Which becomes a recurring thing through the next couple scenes, which again, like we were saying, this movie does have some funny parts, and that's definitely one of them. But then she just offhandedly, in a joking manner, says, he just doesn't like you anymore. But it's so sad when you go back to watch this movie, because that is exactly what has happened.
Yeah.
Where when Podrick does confront Colin, at first he doesn't even know what's going on, because Colin's just like, sit somewhere else. Yeah. He just doesn't even want to talk to him or see him, and so it's very confusing for Podrick, and this is like, this movie is a calamity of errors. This perhaps some of this could have been avoidable if Colin had just chosen a better tact to say, like, I don't want to hurt you, but I don't want to be friends with you. But he takes the approach of just completely cutting Podrick out of his life, and so right off the bat, it's just so heartbreaking to watch Podrick kind of go through this and try to understand what's going on. And, and he keeps trying to figure out what's going on. It's like, maybe this isn't really happening. And, the next day when he sees that it was April the 1st, he's like, oh, it was a joke. And then it's just so sad to see him go back up to Colin and to see that Colin is not joking with him, and he just doesn't want any contact with him.
Yeah, it's an interesting creative choice that the movie makes, that the movie kind of starts in a weird way in media res, because we don't get to see Padraig and Colm as friends, really. By the time that the movie starts, Colm has already made the decision that he wants Padraig out of his life. And we never get a specific answer as to what caused him to make that break. We certainly get hints. We get, context clues from his conversations with Siobhan, with the priest. He even, tells Padraig straight to his face, that why he doesn't want to talk to him anymore. But we don't see the moment that broke him. And I don't think it's the moment where he talks about the 2-hour conversation that Padraig have about what was in his donkey shite. It was my pony shite. So it shows how much you were listening. I promise we will not do Irish accent. There is some brilliant dialogue in this movie that is made better by all of these actors and their wonderful lyrical Irish accents. I will not try to imitate them, but just know that it sounds better when they say it. But it's, when we catch up with Colm and Padraig, within the few minutes, we're already into the central conflict of the movie. And that might be a hard thing to pull off because in order for us to care that these two guys aren't talking to each other anymore, or rather one of them doesn't want to talk to the other one anymore, we have to feel invested in their relationship, and we don't get to see the relationship really that we were supposed to be invested in. But one of the things this movie does so brilliantly is it kind of backfills that information for us through the conversations that the other characters have, that Padraig has with Siobhan, that Siobhan has with Colm, that Padraig and Colm have when they're kind of butting heads. And we get the sense of the fact that these two, in another life, perhaps would not have been friends at all, because they're very different people. They have very different interests. They just happen to both be born and grow up and live on this tiny island off the coast of Ireland. And circumstance allowed them to develop this bond that one would have hoped would be, provide them both some comfort in what seems to be an overall pretty, bleak and sometimes dull existence. But at some point we see that Colm decides he wants something different, which would not necessarily be a better, a wrong thing for him to want. We see that Siobhan wants something different, and that's actually treated as more of a, positive development for her. It's the fact that Colm's decision seems to be driven by, as we later find out in his confessional with the priest, by despair. And he doesn't, and he's not really, he claims he's filling that with his music and wanting to be remembered after he's gone, but he really hasn't replaced what he lost, what he willingly gave away. And it kind of turns him into this very sad character, because you almost don't want to see him figure out what he wants, because you're like, this guy is, he's doing this to himself, quite literally. If he would just snap out of it and wake up, he could, have everything back. But that's part of the tragedy of this movie, is he actually, he may not know ultimately what he truly wants, but he thinks he knows what he doesn't want. And because of that, it causes pain to everybody around him.
Yeah, and to jump ahead a bit, because I feel like it's unavoidable to, to talk about, at a certain point when Podrick won't, according to Colin, leave him alone. He makes, the ultimatum where he's like, each time you bother me from now on, I'm going to cut off a finger. And and this is an extreme an extreme thing to do. And it's funny at that point because it was like, we were thinking that, you were a bit depressed, and and this just kind of, more or less confirms it. But he ends up being very serious, and we see that progress throughout the course of the movie, and so exactly what you're saying, it's made quite literal that he is maiming himself, over the course of the movie, which is going to impact his ability to play music.
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
And so you really do have to, aside from, any sane person would question somebody who's literally cutting off their own fingers, but also the fact that he is sacrificing his ability to do the thing that he said would make him happy, that the reason why he's doing all this. But he's sacrificing that along with his relationship with Podrick. So, it's just, and then we see him have two scenes in the confessional with the priest, and one thing that's like so sad to me is in the second one where both the first time the priest asks him how's the despair, and he's like, it's better now, but then towards the end of the movie, the priest says, so how's the despair now? And he's like, to be honest, just come back a bit, and that's just so sad, it shows him that what he thought he wanted, that's like, it's not filling the void for him. And of course, by that point, he's gone through all this and he's missing all the fingers on one of his hands. So it's so sad by that point. And yeah, it just gets me so much because this movie really is showing, this character who, and it's funny because the first time I saw this movie, I think I was very judgmental towards Colin, and for very good reasons. He does a number of things over the course of the movie that are not great, but I think on this viewing, I had a much more sympathetic eye towards him, just because he's someone who I think, as his life is going on and as he feels himself sort of closer to the end of his life than the beginning, he's searching for meaning and purpose, and he feels like he's wasting his life, and to sort of to have thrown away the thing that he thinks is kind of holding him back from achieving whatever it is he wants to achieve, and then to realize that that's not the answer, and that he's still just as miserable. It's so, like, both of these characters have such very tragic stories, and they're not the only ones. It's very emotional, and I don't know where I'm going with that, so I'll just let you.
Yeah. So what I would say is, this movie is very, I mentioned it's a movie about loss. It also is a movie about, depression and despair and what it can do to people, because, this movie, I think we should mention for context, it takes place in the 1920s, around the time near the end of the Irish Civil War. And I say that, there's interesting historical implications for that and thematic ones, but I say it to basically point out it's a very different time when it comes to things like our understanding of mental health. People say throughout the movie when they're referring to Colm, Siobhan says it, Dominic says it, I think he might be depressed. And they're right. He is most certainly depressed. But their understanding of what that word means is not our modern understanding of what depression is and what it can do to a person. They are right that he is suffering from a mental illness, a kind of quiet despair, but they are from their understanding, it's something that he should be able to, as I think I alluded to earlier, snap out of. Why are you doing this? This makes no sense. Why are you, acting this way? And it's not rational thinking. And that's part of the trap of depression, is that, people who have depression don't always act rationally within their own self-interest. In fact, they can hurt themselves very badly. And in this case, there's a trite reading of this movie where, you can get very frustrated with Colm because you're like, well, if you would just gin up and talk to Padraig like an adult, then this entire movie could be avoided. It's it's the classic stupid argument, oh, well, why didn't they just ask the Eagles to fly the ring to Mordor? And then we don't have the Lord of the Rings. It's people looking at the movie from a very plot specific perspective, and they just like, I knowing better than the movie, have fixed this in the screenplay and therefore removed the need for the movie, and look how smart I am. And I'm like, that's not what the point of this is. This movie actually reckons with the consequences of depression in a very real way, because Colm is being maddeningly frustrating. He is like lashing out, if not violently, then emotionally. He is acting irrationally. And that's the point, because he is in despair and he doesn't know how to handle it. And if you are able to open your heart enough to have that generous reading of the character, then you have a tremendous amount of sympathy for him. But that doesn't make him any more pleasant to be around. And that's one of the traps, is that, there is a realm within this movie where somebody acts this way and you're like, fine, you don't want to talk to me, I don't want to talk to you, go off and be miserable. If that was the attitude that Padraig had taken, then it's very possible that, again, none of the tragedies might have happened. But there's an incongruity, because Padraig doesn't understand what it is that Colm's truly going through. So he thinks about the way, rightly, it's making him feel,
But also, there's the fact that it goes back to the fact that the time and place in which this is set, the fact that this is on a very small island in what did we say, the 1920s?
Yeah, we don't have a specific year, but it is alluded to that this movie takes place towards the end of the Irish Civil War, which I believe happened between 1922 and 1923.
Seemingly the only form of entertainment these guys really have is going to the pub, and otherwise they're kind of left to their own devices. That is not a great situation upon which to, for you to have a lifelong friendship suddenly come to an abrupt end, and you're not being really given an answer as to why that is, other than the fact that, the other person suddenly doesn't like you anymore. In this setting, that's a very tough thing to deal with. And we might say that in a modern setting, you can just, say at that point that it hurts. But there's a number of people you can reach out to, and not just in terms of, again, talking about our more modern understanding of depression and mental health, but honestly, like other things you can do with your time to kind of help you deal with that. There's, other friends that you can reach out to, but in this place where he, like, that is his friend, like, and it's so tiny that, like, there's nothing to really, like, that's the place where they hang out. Every day that he goes up to the pub, he's going to be confronted with this person who just all of a sudden said, I don't want to be, I don't want you to be part of my life anymore. So it's a very difficult thing to deal with. And so, yeah, it's very brutal, which is why, like I said, on my first viewing, and I may have been taking a more simplistic look at it initially, where I was like, well, why is he going about it like this? Why is Colin, not just doing a better job at doing this? And it's because he's not in a very good place. It's just terribly sad for both of them, and unfortunately it doesn't get better.
Yeah, and it's the Colm and Padraig, they're both ultimately, I would argue, and I don't mean this pejoratively, but they are ultimately both selfish characters. And the reason for that is not that some inherent flaw in who they are, it's that they don't necessarily have the tools to figure out another way to be. Padraig has, when he understands that, Colm doesn't want to be friends with him anymore, part of the reason it got to that place is because Padraig, in a way, wasn't giving Colm what he needed. He wasn't necessarily recognizing that his friend was in despair, because he doesn't necessarily share Colm's interests, which is fine. People can have different interests and still be friends, but he was spending time with this guy every day, showing up at his house to take him to the pub day after day after day, and having what he says, is, quote, good, normal chatting, which is a very, it's an admirable thing to want to have. Not every conversation needs to be the philosophical weight of life and death, but clearly that was not what Colm needed from their relationship. And Padraig, for better or definitely for worse here, didn't recognize that. We joked about it earlier, but he went on a 2-hour monologue about what was in his pony shite, and no one, Colm rightly just zoned out of that. And the way Colm chooses to handle that is he thinks, okay, I don't want this man in my life anymore. He doesn't think about what that will do to Padraig, because he thinks that Padraig is a very simple man who will, if he cuts him off and makes it clear, then, Padraig, generally happy lad that he is, will find a way to deal with it. And he doesn't recognize that Padraig doesn't have that tool in his toolkit because he's never had to before. And so these two men really don't know how to communicate about their feelings, which is a common, thing, not just in this era, but for many people of all, ages, genders, and creeds. But he just, what's tragic in particular is that none of them actually feel like there's a way to sit down and have that good normal chat. Maybe Colm would like to talk about music, and Padraig would be able to sit and listen to him talk about that. That's not going to fix their problem, but they don't meet each other halfway. So I'm very frustrated, but also have tremendous sympathy for these two men who just, they can't connect. And some of the connections that we see throughout the movie are are strained in a way. You know, Podrick has a very loving relationship with his sister, Siobhan. They can't really talk either. They spend a lot of time talking past one another as well. Both of them talk past Dominic. You know, Dominic ends up becoming an extraordinarily tragic character because nobody understands him. So the really, it feels like the only time that these characters ever really truly get to communicate is at the end when it's too late and there's been too much that's happened for people to just, you know, move on from.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll definitely get into Dominic, because oh my God, he's, first of all, it's probably a good time to go ahead and praise. We've talked a lot about Colin, Farrell, and Brendan Gleeson, but both both Kerry Condon and Barry Keoghan are. I probably just butchered that. I think Padar corrected me at one point last year. But they're both absolutely extraordinary, and it should be noted that, you know, we can gripe about the fact that the movie didn't win any awards, but all four of these actors were nominated for Oscars, which was so well deserved, and I just think that they're each absolutely stunning in their own ways. What I was trying to say about Siobhan and yeah, I am kind of. Should be noted that I am kind of basing my pronunciation off of my reading for in the movie. I think it is, his name is pronounced Porrick.
Yeah.
But their relationship, and it's interesting that when she says she's leaving, you know, you can see by his first questions following that are very self-absorbed and like, this is more about me than it is about you, and so we love him, but at the same time it's like, yeah, he does have some very selfish tendencies, and I think that's a tragedy of his relationship with Colin, where they are you know, both approaching this from a very selfish perspective. But I was very happy for Siobhan in this, on this viewing. I was like, good for you, you got out of there. You're the only one who's going to be hopefully okay in the long run.
Yeah, no, not necessarily unscathed though. You know,
yeah,
Kerry Condon is so wonderful in this movie. I had seen her in a couple of things before I saw her in this movie, but she just absolutely knocked my socks off in this movie. I just found her to be so warm, so like beautifully empathetic, so like fully realized, but also at her core broken as well, because she is what's interesting about the dynamic is I think I mentioned, she and Porrick have a very loving relationship. You can tell that these two siblings are very close. They mean the world to each other, but they lead very different lives, and they can't be everything to one another, even though, you know, they live together and they've, you know, been you know, maintaining the farm since the presumable loss of their parents. But Siobhan, you can tell that throughout the movie, she's reading books. She seems very intellectually curious, and she doesn't find that source of stimulation on this island that she was fortunate enough to be born onto. There's, you know, she has that great rant where she kind of blows up at at Colin, and
you're
he's
boring.
like,
You're all fucking boring.
You're all fucking boring. And it's a hilarious and righteous moment for her, but it's also that the conversations that she have with Colin actually are essential for her character, because it's not just her, taking him to task. She and Colin seem to have an understanding that Colm and Padraig do not, and in some ways, she and Padraig do not, because there is that absolutely beautiful moment. It's one of my favorite, quiet little moments in the movie, that they're having one of those conversations where they've kind of been at loggerheads, and Colin says, "I do wonder if sometimes I'm just entertaining myself while I stay off the inevitable. Don't you?" And Siobhan kind of takes offense, and she says, "No, I don't." And then Colm just kind of looks at her, kind of offers up a sad little smile, and after a beat just says, "Yeah, you do." And your heart just shatters for her in that moment, because he saw right through her there. And from that moment throughout the movie, she's never the same. The difference is that she ultimately makes a choice that she's going to get out, and she goes to the mainland, and we don't see her after she leaves. We do hear a letter from her that lets us know that, she's landed on her feet, she's doing okay, but she did not get out of this unscathed.
And especially with the fact that with the last letter that we hear from Pádraig, he's, even though he's holding back what happened to Jenny, the donkey, he does tell her that Dominic was found dead in the river. And you can glean from that what you will. We're not definitively told what happened, but you can guess that maybe he committed suicide. And you just have to wonder how she's going to process that information. And that we don't get to see her her receive that information. And so you just, especially after the last scene between her and Dominic, you just have to wonder about how heavy that's going to sit on her, which, it's not. Certainly none of that is her fault, what he was going through. And but you just, how can that conversation not linger with anyone when his last line is, "There goes that dream." It's just so, which we should say for anybody watching this who maybe, I doubt there's anybody watching this who hasn't watched the movie, just because, but that scene is about, him basically confessing that, he's in love with her and asking if she could be, and which she, of course, has to just, let him down as gently as she's able. But it's, you can see that it's just, gut wrenching for him. And yeah, so I do worry about how she, how that information lands for her. I think hopefully she, where she is, I would hope that maybe she's made, new friends on the mainland, and, maybe so she's not left to just ponder that by herself. And I do hope for the best for her, because she deserved it.
Yeah, no, the way that she ultimately responds to everything that goes on with Pádraig and Colm, and the way she kind of fends off Dominic's, clumsy, and oftentimes crude romantic advances throughout the movie, it engenders a tremendous amount of sympathy from the audience towards her, because you truly feel like she is stuck, and you want her to break free, which she does in a way. But what's kind of different about her and Podrick and Colin is that she does not have malice towards her situation. She rarely, if ever, says something towards another person, other than maybe the creepy old, witch lady or the nosy clerk, that makes you feel like she is somehow,
Oh, I have words for that clerk.
Oh, she is. I was going to say she's the worst. She's not actually the worst, because there is one character in this movie who is objectively the worst. But she is, when I say she doesn't have malice, it's that she could be so bitter about the situation that her life is in, and she's not. She just simply wants more, and she wants better for everyone else. And when Dominic comes up to her and, after kind of creeping her out throughout the movie and being generally an annoyance to her, and then out of, to her mind, almost nowhere, although we can kind of see it, kind of makes a clumsy attempt to confess his love for her. She could just be like, take that and kind of swat him aside and be cruel or be taken aback. But there's that wonderful moment where he puts it out there. Do you think you could ever learn to fall in love with a boy like me? And she smiles, and she just, she sees him as much as she can. But she says, "Oh, Dominic, I don't think so, love." And and you can tell that there's no easy way to let him down in a situation like that, but she was trying to do it in the kindest way possible. She was honest with her feelings, and she bears no responsibility for what happens to him.
Yeah.
But that she would not feel that way. And because she ultimately, she knows that Dominic's not right for her. But she doesn't want him to suffer. She doesn't want him to die. She doesn't want him to, live in despair. She just wants to let him know, no, this particular dream, it will not happen, but there could be others for you. But he can't see it, a way out of it after that. And as you said, it's not implied necessarily that he commits suicide, or it's not definitive. I think the context clues kind of lead us to believe that that's what happens. And again, I want to be clear, Siobhan bears no responsibility for that, but it's, there would be an element of despair that she would undoubtedly feel, because anytime something like this happens, it's natural to wonder, what could I have done differently?
Yeah, to be clear, that's what I was getting at, where, she in no way should feel any responsibility for that, but it's just based on the kind of person she is, that I know that she probably will, just because of what we get from her throughout the movie, that she's a very caring person. I just, and so if anything, I just feel really sorry for her, because I know that probably will be what'll follow for her, even though she shouldn't feel that way, especially when we can really just put all the blame there on Dominic's wretched, horrible father, who is the worst person in this movie.
He is the one character who I feel has, other than like the side characters who exist for a very specific purpose, he is monstrous, and the movie shows him to us as such.
Yeah, and it is like, it is probably one of the most satisfying moments in a movie ever, when Colin, punches him out. Does he use his, I don't remember if he uses his bloodied hand, or if he uses the other one. I'm not sure.
I don't remember, but I kind of hope it was the bloody one.
But yeah, no. it's just he's horrible. Just and it's interesting because I thought he was horrible enough on my first viewing. I missed some things on that first viewing of the extent of his abuse of Dominic. Just probably because the thick Irish accents, and I wasn't catching every word. But then on subsequent viewings, it became perfectly clear the extent of his abuse towards Dominic, and it's like I just every moment that he was on screen, I just my skin crawls and oh my god! But it's such a explosive moment when Colin is sitting down in the bar and he's got Dominic's father sitting next to him, which, by the way, Colin looks like he's just had enough of that conversation.
Yeah, it's one of the obviously it's not as horrific as the actual sexual and physical abuse that the policeman father administers on his son Dominic, but you can just see this man abuses his power in every way, shape, and form, both as we see with his interactions with Podrick, but also just the sheer fact that he decides he's going to inflict his company upon Colin, and he's going to make him sit there and listen to his crap because he is the authority figure, and he's going to make Colin listen to talk about, wouldn't it be great to go see an execution? I don't even care who they're killing. I just want to see it. And you get it tells you everything you need to know about what a twisted man this is, and how the fact that he ultimately wears a badge makes life hellish for any person who's unfortunate enough to cross his path.
Yeah, and of course, it's one of the biggest scenes in the movie, which had so much just from a acting and writing standpoint. It's just so absolutely amazing when Park's in there and he's been drinking, and of course Dominic's father had punched him earlier, which, by the way, we'll have to talk about that scene as well, because the carriage ride back towards home is so emotional. But with the scene in the bar, it's the part goes to confront him, and he's like, I'm allowed to talk to you, aren't I? And just everything that builds up to that moment when Colin interjects and Part says, he starts yelling, he's like, and you talking to me now? It's just, it's so I can't, I'm not going to sit here and read off the entire scene, but just then when Colin goes into all the stuff about, music and, and that being remembered. And of course he says 17th century, and then Siobhan says, oh, and it's the 18th century. Which is great. But it's just, and that it's just one of Colin Farrell's most beautiful moments in the movie, when he just talked about valuing niceness over, as he puts it, all that other shite. It's interesting because I sympathize with Colin. I think any of us can, especially those of us who are artistically minded and have this notion that we want to try to leave a mark on this world, and especially as he feels like maybe his life has been wasted a bit, but then from Parrot's point of view, what matters is the people you love and the people who love you, and from his perspective, who cares about what's going to be remembered 50 or 100 years down the line, because from his perspective, that doesn't matter to him. What matters to him is, the people who are important to him.
Yeah.
And it's these two competing sort of worldviews, that, I think that is one of the moments where I will say that it's the moment where I feel the least bit of sympathy towards Colin at the end of that scene, when he says, that's the most interesting he's been. I think I like him again. It's just such a asshole-ish thing to say. And that's one point in the movie where I'm like, screw you. But yeah.
Yeah, neither one of them is necessarily wrong in what they value or what they want. I feel like most movies we are coded to think that, family and niceness and being a good person, that is the ultimate reward. And that's certainly the point of view I'm more naturally sympathetic towards. So my sympathies lie with Padraig during that scene. But Colm wanting to make his mark upon the world, create something that lasts, that will live on beyond him, that is not an evil or wrong-headed thing to want. It's, that he has an artist spirit. We can see that, like, I don't know if the movie tells us whether or not he's truly like a great musician, but it's clear that he loves it. This is something that he is passionate about. And him wanting to do something with that talent is not, something that's wrong. But it kind of feels like at a certain point, his priorities and what he thought he needed to achieve that greatness got twisted. There is this whole archetype that we have in our culture about the so-called tortured genius, so, which I don't think the movie is necessarily coding Colin as a genius, but he is somebody who seems to view the fact that if I don't give everything I have to my work, then I will wind up not having anything at all. And the idea that you can have both doesn't really seem to be something that crosses his mind. And whether that's a function of his despair or just a function of the reality that he lives in, because he doesn't have the greatest opportunities available to him. The way he goes about it, ultimately proves destructive to both. Like, we were joking about it earlier, but the fact it is a very obvious thing. The fact that the way he chooses to make his point to Padraig by cutting off fingers of the hand he uses to play his instrument is objectively destructive to his musical aims. But he seems to be wielding that like a threat in the assumption that it will scare Padraig off. And when it ultimately doesn't, and he feels like stubbornly proud enough to follow through, it hurts him both physically and emotionally, because it makes his dream that much further away. And then the idea that, like, when Siobhan like takes him to task about it, she's like, well, cutting off your fingers isn't going to help your music. And he just kind of looks at her and is like, now we're getting somewhere. And when you're like, what, how, like, this, you did this quite literally to yourself, and you're treating it like it's Padraig's fault. But it doesn't have to be this way. And so,
I think at that point he's like, this will be enough. I can still play my music and I've made my point. But as we see later on in the film, it's what you were saying earlier of people struggling with depression. Don't think, like, rational thought is not, what's going on with him by the point when he decides to cut the rest of the fingers off of that hand. he's obviously, at that point, he's not really thinking clearly, and it's just so sort of maddening to watch when Parrot goes into the bar later, and there's Colin, and he's got the musicians playing around him, and he's just got his violin, and he's just going because that's all he can do. But it's so by that point, like, rational thought is kind of out the window, and but he thinks that at least that's the last straw, and he thinks that this will have done it. But then he gets blindsided by what's happened with Jenny, and then everything kind of turns on its head.
Yeah, because it really it spirals, because the second you could definitely say that the first finger that Colin cuts off his hand as kind of a warning to Parrot, it was effectively to prove a point. And Parrot does seem to, it makes an impression, as Bruce Wayne once said, people need dramatic examples to shake them out of apathy. That happens for Parrot. That's when he and Siobhan are like, I think he's serious. It's like, oh yeah, he's serious.
But it does crack me up then when he's like, oh yeah, I'll take his finger back to him, and she's like, are you out of your mind?
Your mind. Yeah. See, objectively funny there. But the insult, as it were, that causes him to take the remaining fingers off his hand, that is a result of something that Parrot actively does to hurt Colin. When he encounters the musician who, Colin is trying to mentor and, help him with his compositions, a good thing that he's doing. And we see Parrot turn to the dark side effectively for the first time in that scene where he goes up to this random, seemingly nice guy, and straight up lies to him that his father has been struck by a bread van, and you better get home or you're not going to be able to see him before he dies. And then he's like, that's the same. Is it the same bread van that ran over me mother? And you're like, oh. But
it's like, that's how your mother died. And it's like, if it was the same bread van, I'm going to
kill him. Which is that is like pitch perfect black comedy, but it's necessary in that moment to just kind of undercut or underscore, take the edge off what a truly like terrible thing it is that Parrot has just done.
And the fact that he doesn't even he's so on cloud nine by the fact that it seems like Colin is considering like easing back and actually going, to the pub with him, and it does seem like things maybe will ease off at that point, but he's so like absentmindedly just throws that in and is like, this was no big deal, this thing I did, because everything's fine now. And it's just, it's the disregard with which he just throws that information out there, like just unaware of like how horrifically awful a thing that this was that he did. It's like it's just one of those moments where you're like, no.
Yeah. I want to actually point out, because I saw Danny brought this up in the chat, and it's like a perfect thing to point out. The fact, the Dominic calling him out for that and saying, you're just like the rest of them. That's an underrated, like, devastating moment in the tragedy of everything that happens to Dominic, because he, like, you can see how truly hurt he is by that that Pádraic would do something like that, and it's kind of a, it's a very simple wisdom that he's like, I thought you were better than that. I thought you were the nice man that you said you were, and right now you're not. And sometimes you need that kind of like straightforward, like arrow to the heart to cut through all the kind of web of twisted petty grievance that has built up around this point. But when that happens, you realize that Pádraic has truly crossed a line, because in the moment it seems it's kind of a funny thing that it's played for laughs in the moment, and then you realize, oh no, this is not a funny joke. This is like something that's actually has real consequences for people's lives.
And the really sad thing is that Parr takes the wrong thing from that last interaction with Dominic, where what he walks away from that conversation with is, being resolute and trying this new tact with Colin of, like standing up for himself in tough love, and he completely disregards what Dominic says about, what he did with the musician, and the fact that was crossing the line. I don't think that doesn't even really register for him, which just, is really sad. And yeah. Any final thoughts on that before I did want to go ahead and we went a bit over the halfway mark, so I did want to do the mid-roll, but did you want to say anything else on that before we?
No, I think this is a good place for it. We can pick back up after the other side of the break.
Okay, so by the way, I do want to say thanks for the a couple of people who stopped in, and Danny, very happy to have you here. I'm glad somebody has seen the movie. But yeah, so next week is kind of up in the air at the moment, and I haven't had a chance to talk with you about this, Jared, because one thing I could not anticipate when we were planning for our Oppenheimer discussion is the fact that the 4K Blu-ray was going to be very difficult to track down, because either it's sold extraordinarily well or the studio just didn't make enough copies, probably a bit of both, because I still have not been able to obtain a copy of the movie. I'm hoping that they'll restock on Monday or Tuesday, and I can get it just in the nick of time to rewatch it, and then we can do a stream about it. But in the event that does not happen, we may have to come up with an alternative. One thing I did see is that on December 1st, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny will be dropping on Disney Plus. So we could possibly do that if you're game for that, or if you have any other ideas.
No, I think that's a great backup option. Two great movies from this year, and I would not want to deny you the premium home viewing experience of Oppenheimer that you deserve, and force you to buy a digital copy just so we can talk about it. You need to hold true to your guns and get that 4K. I got my Blu-ray this week. I fully intend to watch it again, whether or not we talk about it. I watched it with my parents, and I was like, yeah, this is my favorite movie of the year. We've got 1 month left, but nothing's topping this.
I did come very close to just getting the standard Blu-ray, but then I'd be paying for it twice because I'm still going to get the 4K. I can't do the digital because, first of all, it goes against my principles.
Yes.
But also because the digital version does not have the IMAX scenes in their proper ratio, and
No.
not doing that.
Nope. And third thing would be that Christopher Nolan himself, wants you to champion physical media as well. Like he had that recent statement a week or two ago where he was just like, we have to preserve physical media, so because all these streaming services, you never know when they're going to take it away. And I'm just like, you brilliant man. I already knew you were a great artist, but this is this is just reaffirming it for me.
Yeah, so I'm very much hoping that the couple of the websites that I buy my Blu-rays from, I'm hoping that they get the 4K back in stock early this coming week. If not, I may pick up the standard Blu-ray and just accept the fact that I'll be paying twice for the best film of the year, which I've done worse. So
yeah, but if for whatever reason,
or we may just go with the Indiana Jones plan,
yeah.
Which will be just fine, and it'll be like we'll be able to get like some extra viewing in for that too, because on the same day they're releasing that Harrison Ford Indiana Jones documentary on Disney Plus. So there will be a lot to talk about, and I know you and I have talked about, we very much want to do a discussion on that one, because despite all the internet hubbub, that was actually one of my favorite movie going experiences this year. So
yeah, I know, I loved it. I think that's a movie that sometimes we become a prisoner of the moment, and people see a movie and it either doesn't live up to the past glories of previous movies that they would have compared it to, or it doesn't make enough money, and people are like, well, that movie that must not have been a success. And over time, when once the hubbub fades, you come back to it and you can appreciate it more for the artistry that's there. And I do think that Dial of Destiny is one of those movies that kind of got tagged with an unfair narrative that I would like to see countered as time goes on, because I do think that movie is a very fitting send off for one of the greatest cinematic characters of all time, and that would be what I loved.
Yeah, I was very happy about the fact that it gets a little difficult just because of the way everybody interacts with each other. But I have been going through various periods this year of purposely staying away from social media, and then also not reading movie reviews and headlines and all that stuff. And Dial of Destiny was one of those where I did not. I think I was aware that very early reviews of the movie were mixed on it, but I wasn't in tune with what the conversation was about the movie, like in the week leading up to, and then immediately after the film came out. So I just got to go see it with my dad, which meant a lot, because first of all, Indiana Jones is a great thing for fathers and sons to watch together, but also because I would have gone to see that with my mom, and so the fact that Dad and I went to go see it, it kind of felt like we were honoring her in a way. And so I just remember that it was a very rewarding experience, and both he and I enjoyed the movie a lot. So that'll be so yeah, it's, as far as I was concerned, the movie was a complete success. And then a couple weeks later, I got wind of what the conversation around the movie was, and I was like, surprise.
Yeah.
But yeah, so next week will probably either be Oppenheimer or Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And which, oh, by the way, I have my Raiders shirt on. Should have saved that. Or I can just wear it again.
Yeah.
So that'll be the plan for next week. And then I think you said you need to take at least the week after that off, right?
Yeah. So we may have another short hiatus, at least for the two of us, after that, because my family is going on a vacation in early December between the 9th and the 16th. And I would be normally happy to try and work the stream in, except I think those are literally our travel days. So we will definitely be missing. I'll definitely be missing 1 week, possibly two. But for it, once, hopefully, after that we can come back and continue and not have any more like unexpected interruptions. And in the interim, I was thinking if you ended up wanting to use that week to do a stream with like one of our other friends who, perhaps about a movie I either haven't seen or one that, you want to do with one of them specifically, that this might be a good opportunity for it.
Well, here's the thing: we may end up having some bad timing, and it may be an extended break from the channel because I will be going on vacation at the end of December to see family in Maryland. So yeah, it might end up stretching out to a longer hiatus because I will be gone the weekends of the 23rd and the 30th. So yeah, we'll see. Maybe we'll get something in between, maybe not. But if not, we'll just be back at the start of the new year.
Yeah, and I mean, if that's the case, then yeah, we can kind of do a little bit of a reset. And I know we've got plans for a couple of other movies. New Year is always a good time to start something new. Whether that's one of the series that we've talked about, or if we want to do like a retrospective looking back at something, we'll figure it out. But we're not going away. It's just this, this is the time of year when travel schedules and logistical schedules do not always line up. And I don't think we're alone in the people who have these kind of, podcasts, YouTube style conversations and being plagued by inconsistent travel schedules.
Yeah. And of course it's interesting because I was supposed to go on my Maryland trip a couple of weeks ago. Hence where some of our hiatus was coming into play. But I ended up still taking that time off because I was sick and didn't go on my trip, obviously. But that's okay. We'll get through these next couple weeks and do what we can, and then we'll be in the clear at the start of the new year. I did want to ask you real quick before we jump back in, because I have seen a couple things the past couple weeks, movie-wise. Have you gotten out to see the Marvels yet?
I did. I went opening weekend. And I specifically wanted to make sure that I went opening weekend, which I have not been doing for a lot of movies this year because of logistical reasons. But the moment I saw that this movie was scheduled to be at the center of a cultural tsunami of shit flinging on from every side, I'm like, I need to see this before all this taints my experience. So I made a priority to go out there, and wouldn't you know, it's a great little fun movie. Not my favorite in the MCU, far from the worst. Definitely not a movie that deserves all the pillorying that it was receiving for all kinds of unfortunate and I often find ill-informed reasons. It's just it's fun. It's well done too. And yeah, I'm sure you want to talk about the mid-credits scene, which yes,
it doesn't like. Here's the thing: the movie doesn't have the weight of like one of the quote unquote best MCU movies. Like one of my favorite movies from this year, and I think the only thing that beats it, honestly, is Oppenheimer, is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which I thought was just extraordinary. And that has like a lot of great storytelling of and emotional weight and all that. The Marvels is not that, but it's an incredibly, like, the word I keep using, it's fun. It's an incredibly fun, like, sort of short and snappy, wonderful movie. It's I could have even stood. I could have stood for it to be longer. Obviously, if that's what my one criticism, but in a lot of ways, that's the movie's strength. I feel like, it doesn't, like, it's just, it almost, I don't want it to sound like a dismissive thing when I say that it's like, it's short and breezy and fun, but it plays that as a strength. And I thought the chemistry with all the actors was just absolutely fantastic. And I had just watched Miss Marvel before going to see the movie, and I was so glad I did, because it was just, that's a great setup for everything in this movie. And but I won't lie, like, the icing on the cake was that mid-credits sequence, which if I can't help it, I have to, it's been a couple weeks, so, like, if you haven't seen the Marvels and you don't want to be spoiled about, like, upcoming things in Marvel, just turn down your volume for like 30 seconds to a minute. I'm just gonna say, okay, I'm gonna talk about it. We got Beast. and
it's Kelsey Grammer. It's the version that we know.
Well, what's great is it's Kelsey Grammer, but it's also, the visual look is very much more so Beast from X-Men the animated series and the 90s comics X-Men, and that just had me so excited, because it's like the marriage of the two most perfect things. It just got me so happy, and I was like, oh my God, I can't wait for them to fully bring in the X-Men now. And I'm very excited about the way they're doing it. And the fact that, like, there's a lot of people who are, like, cynical about all this, and I'm like, I don't have time for you. I'm like, I just think it's so brilliant that they're using the whole multiverse construct to weave in, the X-Men, which have, mutants have decidedly not been part of the MCU, and to do it in this way it's just, I think it's brilliant, and I'm very excited to see, like, how much of the Fox, movie series they're going to honor with, like, casting choices and whatnot. I know some things are unrealistic because certain actors have, are kind of aging out by this point, but the fact that they're bringing back Kelsey Grammer as Beast, is, a sign to me that they at least care about honoring, what's come before. I kind of felt the same way that I felt about when they brought in J.K. Simmons to, play J. Jonah Jameson. Even before we knew what they were doing with Spider-Man No Way Home, I was like, at least you've acknowledged that nobody else can play, J. Jonah.
and they're doing a little, like, they had Patrick Stewart cameo as Charles Xavier in Multiverse of Madness, and Hugh Jackman is coming back as Wolverine in Deadpool 3 next year. But the way that those characters are being set up, I could see, like, okay, they're doing this as kind of more of a nod rather than this is their plan for the characters going forward. With the way they incorporated Beast at the end of the Marvels, you're like, oh no, you're actually gonna take us to an X-Men related universe, and that it's not the X-Men universe that we know. It's going to be one that's very similar.
And that's one of those things where they can do it. They can have him be that character just because that's a voiceover, and they're obviously doing a more CG iteration of Beast, which I thought he looked fantastic. And like I said, very much like X-Men the animated series, which, like, and the fact that they've incorporated the theme music into a number of their movies and stuff, and the fact they're doing the X-Men 97 animated series, like, and the fact that that's going to be the first full-on X-Men thing that Marvel Studios does is just so exciting. Anyway, I just had to get some of that out. We'll get back on topic, but
go see the Marvels if you haven't. If for no other reason that Iman Vellani is a star and she deserves all the praise that's rightly come her way.
Oh yeah, and she like, and it was probably because I had just watched Miss Marvel, but like she was the standout of that. I love her and I love her whole family. Anyway, so back to the main program. So we're going to go from happy Marvel stuff to sad and depressing. But we needed a little bit of that. So where did we leave off?
I think we had left off with Dominic and the Podrick kind of, crossing the line into the dark side with his the kind of cruel crank he plays on the young musician, and the effect that it ultimately has on Colm and their relationship.
Yeah, like I was saying, I just find it so heartbreaking that, like, Porrick was so close to like repairing things a bit, and the fact that, I mean, I think there's a number of ways you can take, that scene, but sort of my understanding of it was that I think Colin actually was willing to go have drinks with him, and it wouldn't have been like the full restoration of their friendship, but like little baby steps. But it's that knowledge of what Porrick did that just then sends everything spiraling again.
Yeah, and the fact that like Colm may never have found out about it if Porrick hadn't chosen to disclose it, and it kind of makes you curious as to why if he thought it was just okay, so we're going back to the way things were normal now. Good, then we just clear the desk. Oh, by the way, this happened. You don't need to worry about it, and it ends up being the thing that breaks their relationship forever. But I kind of feel like that information had to come out, and if it hadn't come out there, then it would have come out some other way at some other time. It happened to be a particularly well-placed bomb that just destroyed whatever was left, whatever chance these two men might have had at mending the fences, as it were, because it really, this is the point where it becomes like it becomes more of a spiteful act rather than a like tragic misunderstanding, because throughout the movie, there had been moments where Colm had been very much giving Podrick mixed messages after the policeman Potter beats him down. Colm shows up, as you alluded to, socks the horrible policeman in the face, picks Podrick up.
Well, no, that doesn't happen until later.
Oh, later. You're right. But he picks Podrick up. And he takes him home, and he's kind of like patting him on the back, and you can see that like he is trying to get him out of the situation and take care of him, but he doesn't talk to him. And there's that moment where he breaks down on the
Colin Farrell just breaks my heart there, and of course that's the moment when Colin has the is it a horse or a pony or the cart that's
yeah.
has it come to a stop, and because he just, he can't deal with part, breaking down there, and it's just so sad. And again, I'm like, how do you not give Colin Farrell an Oscar? But yeah, no, it's one of those. It's a really beautiful moment, but it's so sad because it is giving part mixed signals, there, but also, the thing is that Colin does still care about him, and so in that moment where, he's in need, he does want to help him. So
Yeah, and he says, like, I think he even says at one point to either Pádraic or to Siobhan that it's what he's going through. It's not about Pádraic ultimately. Like it is him. He's working through something. He doesn't think Pádraic's going to be helpful to him working through it, so he's cutting him out of his life, like, rather cruelly. But he doesn't hate Pádraic. He doesn't have ill will towards him. He just feels like he shouldn't be part of his life right now. But the mixed messages that he sends to them ultimately prove more destructive, because that he gives Pádraic the idea that, well, if there's just something I can do to, like, kind of reach back out and mend those fences, whether or not it's, standing up for myself so that I become more interesting, then we can cross that divide again. And when he thinks he's reached that point in the scene in the hut later, when Colm, like, finishes his composition called the Banshees of Inisherin, which, he just likes the double SH sounds. That's the I know there are no Banshees on Inisherin, but that was their opportunity. And in what could be a moment of clarity and reconciliation, it becomes the moment that there's no going back from. Because once Colm learns what Pádraic did, and he cuts off the remainder of his fingers and goes and throws them at Pádraic's house, that sets in motion the chain of events where these two men are acting with ill will towards each other, and the collateral damage is going to be inevitable at that point.
Yeah, there's so much, like, I don't know how to explain sort of what I feel in the moments when, of course, I don't want to skip over the most heart-wrenching part of all this, which is, of course, the fact that Jenny the donkey, chokes on, one of the fingers. It's just like, it's so horribly tragic. And just, and the fact that he brings her inside first, and he's just, holding her and putting her before he buries her. It's just like, anybody who's ever, had a pet just can't possibly make it through this part of the movie without falling apart. And, oh God.
Yeah.
But the fact that, but then what follows that, when he goes into the pub, it's just, I don't even know how to, like, describe how I feel in the moment, because on the one hand, it's so utterly tragic and sad that this changes Park, but at the same time, on, like, it's almost, I don't know what other use to word, but there's an exhilaration in a very sad way to seeing Park, who has been, so, like, just sad, and like, not that he's, obviously he's still very sad at that point, but the fact that he's on the sort of the lower, part of this battle, that's been going on, where he's sort of always been on the defensive about it, and the fact that he marches in there and he has like this now hatred for Colin, and this determination that the way he says, you know, we we won't call this the end, call it the start, and the fact that now this is going to be this, you can sense that this is the beginning of this almost battle between these two, where he's in a very different place. So it's this weird, from my perspective as an audience member, it's this weird conflicting, like almost an adrenaline rush of watching Colin Farrell take this character to a new place that's so terribly sad and tragic. But it's, I almost don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, so this might be a good point to kind of talk about the thematic setting of the movie, which is, I think I mentioned it takes place in 1922, 1923, towards the end of the Irish Civil War. And there are some people, some who have had a critical reading of this movie, critical in the, the literary analysis sense, that is this movie meant to either be an allegory or a, some kind of examination of, the Irish state of mind during this tumultuous period in the aftermath of the War of Independence leading into the Irish Civil War, when they had been fighting the English, now they're fighting each other. They can barely remember, some people can barely remember who they're supposed to hate and why. And the movie doesn't directly engage with those ideas, but it sets the context, because throughout the movie you see a couple of times where characters are walking along the beach and they hear gunfire off in the distance, off on the mainland, and it startles them, or they look out, as I think Pollack says at one point, good luck to you, whoever you are, whatever it is you're fighting about. And I don't think
which I have to say that I took it sort of, I had a dark chuckle at that moment, because it's like, that's me like looking at social media off in the distance.
Yes, that would definitely be about a textual narrative you could apply that would not be the intention of the artist, but is a fair reading. But what I really wanted to say about that is the idea that, it may not be a direct allegory, but this kind of setting informs the conflict between our two main characters, because we don't ultimately understand what it was that they were fighting about, what the inciting incident was that caused them to wind up on opposite sides, as it were. But what we do see is the irrevocable breaking moment, where when Colm's severed fingers ultimately are ingested by the donkey Jenny, and who represents in this movie, I'll go ahead and presume to say, innocence, a complete, just bystander who has been nothing but good, nothing but sweet. She has no part in this conflict, but she pays the price for the conflict that has emerged between these two. And that kind of collateral damage, that loss of innocent life, is the thing that takes this conflict from kind of a simmering Cold War into a hot war, where, at least on Pollack's side, he's done trying to understand or to reconcile. He wants blood. He wants blood for blood. He wants an eye for an eye. He is ready to kill, as it goes, because he makes the decision: I'm going to burn down your house, Colm, and I'm telling you what time I'm going to do it, but I don't care if you're in there. I'm going to do it either way. And that is him essentially saying, you crossed the red line, so I am going to cross it in turn, and whatever happens, you brought this on yourself, which is very apt to the whole war idea, because at this point, especially in the Civil War, a lot of times it's friends fighting against friends, family against family, and the lines between good and evil are not morally clear. you just know that someone and something who doesn't deserve to hurt or is gonna ultimately get hurt because of this.
Which really, in the abstract, you can say it doesn't even specifically have to relate to this war that's off in the distance, but really any war. And war as an idea, and the fact that things can escalate and get away from you, and then by that point you don't even care because there's nothing but simmering hatred.
Yeah. And it's really, when it comes down to it, we see what Pádraic is prepared to do, and we see him follow through. And whether or not his heart was, truly in it, whether or not he truly wanted to kill Colm, we don't know. You get the sense that if all he wanted was Colm's death, then he would not have told him what time he was going to burn his house. He would just have gone and done it. But he tells him this is going to happen at this time, and whatever happens will happen in this period. It kind of almost represent. Well, I'm not going to say almost. It is Pádraic's own form of despair here, because he has crossed the line into not caring. He's spent all this movie caring about what happens with his friendship with Colm. He caring about whether or not he remains nice and good, and here he is willing to accept whatever consequences may come. And we see that could have had legal consequences for him if perhaps the policeman had managed to get there in time to stop him. But by that point, the chain of events that has been set off ultimately leaves him to be able to get away with this. But we also see that he has not entirely lost his moral compass, and it's an interesting little grace note in there, because he does still have a semblance of perspective, because he goes in and he finds the Colm's dog, and before he sets light to the house, he goes in, he sees the dog, who is another innocent in this whole play that's going on, and he just kind of scratches him behind the ear. He's like, "What would I ever hurt you for?" And he saves him, and that's how you know that things aren't completely lost. But it's he still takes this action that, as he says, some things we can't move on from. He feels compelled, like he has to do this in order to reset.
And him marching into the pub and saying, "I'm going to do this at this time," it's a declaration of war, basically. And it's, and the thing with Colm's dog is interesting, because then of course there's the moment at the very end of the film with the two of them on the beach, and and their last exchange, which is when Colin says, "Thanks anyway for taking care of my dog," and to which Part says, "And anytime." And it's there's different readings for that, and in my opinion, but I'm more inclined to take the more pessimistic and sad, to draw from it that his kindness at that point is extended towards this innocent animal, but he's not extending that to Colin at this point, and he won't, because I do think that what we have at the end of the film is through this horrific sad chain of events, what we witness over the course of this film is the complete disillusion of a friendship.
Yeah.
And so what we're left with is I don't think that it's inferred that they're going to come back from this at the end of the movie. So yeah, it's like, and anybody who hasn't seen this movie, I keep saying it's so tragic and sad. I'm not really like, it's not necessarily pumping people up to go and watch the movie, but it's it's a beautiful film, but it is, and so much of that beauty is in its tragic nature. But the ending of this movie is just such a gut punch for me, and the moment when Park says, it's Colin says, sorry, and I forget the exact wording. Was he say? I guess my house makes us quits.
Yeah.
Then and then Park says, would have made us quits if you'd stayed in there, but you didn't, did you? Oh my God. And it's just so brutal.
Yeah. It's like that, the ambiguity of that ending lies kind of in our wondering what the new status quo will be, because I do think I wholeheartedly agree with you. The movie, I think, makes it relatively clear through the line of Podrick saying, some things you can't move on from, and I think that's a good thing. I don't think that promises reconciliation in any way, but it does kind of offer promise of an understanding between the two that could potentially settle into kind of an uneasy peace of sorts, because ultimately these two men, they aren't leaving Inisherin. They will still be, neighbors and, kinsfolk, and they may be able to do, cordial things for one another, like looking after me dog anyhow. But they will, there has been too much that has happened for them to resume what they once had of their friendship. And that loss represents an irrevocable scar for of a wound from a conflict that will not heal. We love Lord of the Rings on this this feed. It really did make me think of the different contexts, but the idea of Frodo saying at the end of Return of the King, there are some things that time cannot mend, some wounds that go too deep, that have taken hold. And that doesn't mean that you Frodo isn't ultimately his heart isn't tainted, but he is scarred, and ultimately the only recourse for him is to pass away, to go into the West, which these characters don't do. These characters choose to linger, kind of like, in a way, those who ultimately can't pass into Valinor, they stay in Middle Earth and they diminish.
I do appreciate you coming to the end of the stream with some Lord of the Rings discussion. Thank you.
Believe it or not, that just cropped up. I wasn't planned, truly.
Yeah, it's just, and again, it's so sad seeing seeing Park go from that young man with a beaming smile at the beginning of this movie to then what we get at the end of the film. It's just I've got to say that I do think it's his best work, and he has impressed the hell out of me for a great number of years. Which, by the way, I did want to say something on his career. It's interesting that you were talking earlier about the fact that he was getting thrown into these types of roles where he was supposed to be like the leading man, the sort of stoic leading man. And I looked at, I think that, what was it, 2004, 2005 was like a crossroads of his career, because I think he had two leading performances where he was supposed to be like the Hollywood leading man. One of them was in 2004, the other was in 2005, and I do kind of view them as the fork in the road, diverging his career paths. Because in 2004, I think you had the culmination of what Hollywood kind of wanted from him, which was he was the lead in this big, old-fashioned Hollywood epic, Alexander, directed by Oliver Stone, and the poor man was just like, I always say I don't judge him super harshly for that, because I think he did his damnedest, and I just think a lot of forces conspired to where that project just didn't overall work. I think a lot of things in the movie actually do work, but overall it just didn't come to, and I don't think that's his fault.
No.
Then the following year, you had something that from the outset could look very similar, but couldn't have been more different, which was his performance in Terrence Malick's The New World, which I think was much more suited to him as the kind of actor he is. The studio kind of marketed that as another big old-fashioned Hollywood epic, but anybody who's a fan of Terrence Malick knows that that's the furthest thing. But his acting abilities and his sensibilities, I think, were perfectly matched for that movie. And from that point out, I just think he started making, he started carving a different path for himself. And In Bruges was the big thing that I think for a lot of us announced, like, wait a second, this guy's capable of some different things than what we had him pegged for. So yeah. So it's just, and when you said that, was this really his first Oscar nomination?
It was.
Shocking. That's just that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But hopefully there will be many more to come now that he's broken.
It should be the first of many, because sometimes you have to break through, and then they'll start showering them on you. So hopefully that will be the case for Colin Farrell, because he is very deserving of that kind of opportunity, and I'm going to be glad to see him continue to get these types of roles. And in the meantime, I'm very much looking forward to seeing him in the Penguin HBO show that'll be coming out next year. Because that's the kind of, like, it's not like it's like, oh, he can never do franchise work again. He needs to stick to these small indies. It's like, if you're going to do something like the Batman or like that, by all means,
I still can't believe that's him underneath that makeup. I watched that movie and I'm like, it just doesn't, like, nothing about that character feels like Colin Farrell to me. It's brilliant work. But I haven't even allowed myself to be excited about that just ever since the strikes. I'm like, that is so far off in the distance. But now I can start anticipating it again. But also, like, talking about the actors in this film, then it's also hard to remember that the first thing I saw Brendan Gleeson in was Braveheart, and that goes all the way back. So, and I love that he is, his career is just, he's another actor who he's just continued to advance over the years. For so long, he was just doing like supporting turns, and it's so great over the past like several years or more to see him get the opportunity to take on these lead roles.
Yeah, and this was also his first Oscar nomination. So the fact that they got to, pair him up was, it was tragically overdue, but it was fitting.
It seems so long ago just because of all the stuff that happened over the past year, but I'm just now remembering the two of them over the Oscar season. Yeah. They were like two kids in a candy store, just like in terms of like how happy they were.
Yeah.
And they were just like the two of them were just having a ball, just hanging out with each other on the award circuit. So they probably didn't. I'm sure they looked like, they looked like they didn't care if they actually won anything. They were just so happy to be in each other's company.
Yeah, so. No, they were their bromance is still going strong, and may it continue.
Which, by the way, this is a picture that I didn't put up when we were talking about the carriage scene because it was not appropriate, because this is a behind the scenes picture. And this does not depict the emotional state of the characters in the movie, but it shows how much the two of them love each other.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, that's them somewhere off in the multiverse. They're having a grand old time.
Oh yeah, I cannot tell you, like, this will be me like talking about Marvel again for a couple minutes, but I have really enjoyed the license that the whole multiverse device has given me to talk, the way I sort of talk about movies, where I'm like, this is actually in the multiverse of this. It's like every movie that Keira Knightley and Matthew McFadden are in together, it's like the multiverse. Along with Tom Hollander. But yeah, no. So yeah, this movie ends on a terribly sad note. There's no way around it. And the only one who really kind of looks like, they hopefully are going to be, have happy days on the horizon. Siobhan, I hope for the best for her, but it certainly doesn't seem like, because Pádraic is resolved to stay on Inisherin. And it certainly doesn't seem like that's going to change. And oh my God, my camera is just doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But and I definitely worry about Colin. Just especially with, like, because now what's he got? He's destroyed this relationship to the point where it's irrevocably changed, and he's missing all his fingers on one of his hands. So music's going to be hard. So yeah, I think the two of them are just, they don't have very happy futures coming their way, I think. But that's why we call it a tragedy.
Yeah. No, it very much feels like that kind of tragedy in a classical sense, where the faults of the main characters bring things down to it proves to be their undoing, and the old kind of witch woman, Mrs. McCormick, throughout the movie she's kind of our witch character, and effectively, offering prophecies of death coming to Inisherin, which it does. Dominic tragically dies, Jenny tragically dies, but ultimately the true, or not the true death, but like really you can feel like the death that the movie is leaving with is the death of the friendship between these two men, and the fact that death, at least in this universe, maybe not in every multiverse, but in this one, it's an irreversible event. And we do see it. I find it an interesting choice that we have we see the Polrick and Colm like having their conversation on the beach, and that absolutely beautiful shot. But we also see Mrs. McCormick looking over them, kind of as if she was seeing the prophecy that she had ultimately foretold coming true at last.
Okay, she just scares me.
Well, she's supposed to. In terms of like hilarious things in the movie, the fact that like the way people react to her is one of those things that is just hilarious. Like the fact that Siobhan like actively avoids her, and Dom's like, "Yes, you do. You turn around when you see her coming down the road." She's like, "I do not," but she does. And then there's the beautiful moment when later in the movie, like Podrick has accused her of hiding behind walls when Mr. McCormick comes by, and then he sees her coming, and then he hides behind the wall, and he's like, "Is she gone?" And then he pokes his head up, and she's right there, and he's like, "Oh no!" Yeah. See, we don't want you all to get the impression this movie is not funny. It is very funny. It's just that,
but it's also very, very sad.
It's also very sad.
No, and then there's some more like creepy moments with her when Siobhan is like standing next to the river, and and she's like beckoning, which, by the way, the sight of her beckoning, and then she's got her little hut next door. Can I just say that after seeing The Witch, I'm like, no.
Oh no, yeah. Don't go knocking on witches' doors,
And then the moment with her that's really chilling is then when Siobhan is leaving the island, and she's waving goodbye to Porrick, and we see her kind of uneasy for a second, and then we see that the old woman is on on the cliff, a bit further away from Bart. We don't actually the camera doesn't focus in on her. She's she's out of focus, but it's just that's an uneasy sight for Siobhan as she's leaving the island, because she cares about her brother, and and that seems like an unsettling sight.
Yes.
Yeah,
no, but so many great characters in this movie. I just wanted to shout out her because I thought she had some thematic, resonance. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the actress's name. Breedney Nechain, or actually no, it's Sheila Filton, because the other one plays Mrs. O'Riordan, who she is pure comic relief in this movie. The postman.
Okay, so let's put Dominic's father in a different category, because he's just scum of the earth. Yeah. But talking about everybody else, she's horrible. She is just because she's so nosy, and and she reads people's mail because she wants gossip.
Yeah.
Oh God. I mean, okay, in the grand scheme of things, not the worst kind of person you can be, but but also kind of she is.
Yeah, no, she serves her purpose well as kind of part of the choir of supporting characters who provide the color and the fun to the movie. The bartender and the barflies are also.
We didn't even mention that. I love them. Yeah. The way they just go back and forth, and yeah. Are you Rowan? It sounds like you're Rowan.
Yeah. Should they go talk to him? That would be the best thing.
That would be the best thing. Oh my God. Yeah. They're so, and it's little stuff like that keeps the heaviness of the movie from being too much. Because as sad and tragic as the movie is, you do also need that balance of those comedic grace notes to like put, but that's why exactly what you said with the scene where Park is, you know, tricking the student, the musician, like that could just, we could be watching that and we could just be thinking, oh my god, this is horrible, but the comedy in the scene helps, you know, ease us off so that we're laughing when, even though it's absolutely horrible. And I still I still stand by what I said, that it was ridiculous seeing this movie nominated for best comedy, because I think it's much more of a drama than it is a comedy, but it does have funny.
Yeah, I mean, the Golden Globes will stick any movie into comedy that, you know, isn't like a deathly serious dirge, and so, you know, it's fine because, you know, because Colin Farrell may not have won Academy Award for that, but I think he did win the Golden Globe, so, you know, at least he got.
Yeah, and well, they actually gave him the Golden Globe for In Bruges as well. Yeah. So I think they're fans of his too, which can't blame them.
Nope.
But yeah, so anything else you wanted to?
I feel incumbent upon me to give you the opportunity to talk about Carter Burwell's score, which was another nomination for this movie, and which is gorgeous. Not quite. I mean, I think my favorite Carter Burwell score is still Carol, because that is just like god tier music. But this is up there. It is outstanding.
Did you watch the stream I did?
I did. That movie is just like, that is one of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen in my entire life.
I listened to the score from that movie and my heart just starts fluttering because I'm overcome with romantic emotions and all that. That is such, like, my only regret about the stream. I did it with Emma, and the only thing that sucked was that the signal was really bad. So like the video quality on that stream was not great, but we still had a great conversation, and that movie is just out of this world amazing. But that is me working around to saying that Carter Burwell is a genius. He has a very specific kind of sound to his music, but this is one of his like darker scores, but it's like everything he does, it's so fitting. And but also what's interesting is that you don't have the music throughout. It plays at very specific moments, and often the movie allows those emotional moments to play without music. So I think it makes those moments very effective, but also it makes the music all the more effective when it does come in. And yeah, it's just, I love his music because he's never kind of shaken from his style. He's one of those musicians that doesn't like, he's a classic, you know, even though his style is not like the sort of concert music of John Williams kind of style, it is still like a classic orchestral kind of sound. And I love it. I've loved his music from, you know, going all the way back to, he did the score to A Knight's Tale, which is one of my favorites, which I feel like it's underappreciated because so much of that movie is the rock and roll music. But the orchestral score is beautiful there. And as we said, you know, he did the music for Carol, and, you know,
he's done a lot of Coen brothers.
The Coen brothers, yeah. I love the music in True Grit, especially, which is beautiful. And yeah, so it's interesting trying to talk about the specific like thematic work in the movie, because he very often, I feel like he uses simpler musical ideas than, like, you know, he's not a John Williams or Howard Shore in sort of the complexity of musical themes. I think he takes more simple ideas, but it's very effective the way that's done. And so, yeah, it's just what he does with this movie is he just casts this very like sad, emotion over the whole thing. So
Yeah, like my favorite piece of the score is probably, it's a very short, I think it's like 2.5 minutes piece called "The Mystery of Inisherin," which is, it's very kind of like, it has a kind of like lyrical quality to it. There's like, it's kind of got a white rising quality with some melancholy underneath it, and the movie, like, it uses its score very judiciously. I think, as you know, that because this is not the type of movie that needs like the music to like come slamming down and tell you, okay, this is the big emotional moment, like, but it complements it very, very well. And when you like are watching these tragic scenes playing out, and the score kind of is like this little undercurrent that's kind of lifting the scene along with it, you realize what like a masterful composition this is. So I feel like it's incredibly worthy work. I do hope that Carter Burwell ultimately will, continue to get recognized for what great work he does. I think this movie lost to for score to All Quiet on the Western Front, which I understood because the score in that movie is very like direct and stays with you. There are 4 notes in particular that just burn their way into your mind. So it's a very, it's a more iconic quality.
I have to say I haven't watched that movie in full yet, but I've and it wasn't because I wasn't like into the movie or anything, but I think I started to watch it and then I got sidetracked with something, and it was like, oh, I'm gonna have to go back to it. I don't know how I feel about the music in that one.
Yeah. It is very much a, like, it serves its function in the story very, very well. There are certain scores where you want to just listen to the music on its own because it's so beautiful and such a work of art in and of itself. And then there's music that suits the movie and the needs of the movie very, 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 very well. And I feel like that the music in All Quiet on the Western Front is the latter, even if it kind of has a bit of an anachronistic quality to it at times. But I can see why it won, and I love that movie. So
yeah, and I think that's what rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. In fairness, I should see the whole movie before I judge how the music works in it. But I remember feeling like it was very abrasive and kind of slightly felt out of place. But like I said, I want to give it a fair shake, and I may feel differently after I see the whole movie. But sorry about that.
No worries.
Let's. Okay, so
I think this might be our cue to start wrapping up before technology fails us altogether.
Yeah, let me. There we go. Okay, so I can at least be on camera when I say goodbye. I really just need to. This is my cue to order a new camera. Thankfully, recently I signed up for another year of Amazon Prime. So, because I think this one is starting to say my time is done. But yeah. So anyway, so the music is beautiful, and this movie remains, I think, one of my favorites of last year, and was kind of like, it was kind of the underdog, throughout the year. But I think you and I were having this conversation actually last year when, or I guess this year when the awards were going through. It was like, it's easy to kind of get upset about those things, and as I showed on this stream, I'm still a little testy about it, but the thing is, these things tend to fade, and
Yeah.
And what we're left with is the movie. And the movie is beautiful and poignant and just it's obviously stays with us. And so at the end of the day, that's what matters when it comes to films like this. And I'm just so happy that they got the band back together for this one, and we got another film directed by Martin McDonagh with these two actors as well as the other actors in this film. Which, and I got to say again, like the fact that all four main actors in this movie got awards nominations. And just amazing. And I'm trying to think, did they win the they didn't win SAG, did they?
No, I think Everything Everywhere probably won that.
Oh yeah, of course. Of course, I keep forgetting that pretty much dominated the year, and rightfully so. It's a wonderful movie. So, and that's why I don't like to get all competitive, with this stuff, because then I end up hating on extraordinary movies just because they weren't my favorites, and I don't like to do that anymore. So, okay, so wrapping up, and next week, tentatively we're talking about Oppenheimer, but if I don't get that 4K Blu-ray by then, we might switch over to Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. But we'll just see. And then after that, we may be going on an extended hiatus, depending on how things line up, because we'll both be going, away for holiday shenanigans with our families. And yeah, so anything you want to add as we wind down?
No, I'm just I was glad to be back talking about this movie. We joked that it's kind of a one for us just because it was a smaller movie, but we did have some good participation in the chat. I hope that if you do find it the time to check out a movie like this, that you find it worthwhile. And in the meantime, our schedules may be inconsistent, but I hopefully by the new year we should be back doing this regularly, because we've got plans. We'll definitely Oppenheimer and Indiana Jones in whatever order, and then I think we've had a couple other conversations about stuff we'd like to do. We want to keep this going.
Yeah, and we do have some Tolkien related stuff that we're going to do, which we wanted to do for December this year, but I just don't think that's in the cards at this point. So, but that's okay.
I think our friends will forgive us for talking about Tolkien at any time of the year, even if December is traditionally our Lord of the Rings month.
Yeah. Thanks, Danny, for sticking through the whole time. It was great to see you in the chat and everybody else who popped in. Yeah, so I guess that's it. If you haven't seen the Marvels, go see the Marvels. Because I will say it was some of the most fun I've had at the movies in a while now, and it's a shame that it's not doing better at the box office. So, not that such things should matter, but unfortunately, yeah, they kind of do. So I wish more people would go see it. And yeah. So then I don't know. I ran out of things to say. So
yeah, no, I think we can leave our friends on Inisherin for the time being, and we'll be back next week with another good discussion of one of two great movies from this year. So
yeah. All right, everyone, have a wonderful night, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.